So since there isn't too much to talk about right now in the NHL, but we are still kind of in that free agency phase where there's still some decent names out there available, I wanted to take a look forward at the 2020 free agent class next summer. Obviously these are all unrestricted free agents, and I'm going to be highlighting the best 10 players in my opinion. But on the screen right now, before we get into the top 10, we have some honorable mentions. Alex Galchenyuk is a guy who could definitely jump into the top 10. A contract year for him playing with guys like Malkin and Crosby, I think he's definitely in for a significant, increase in point totals from previous years. Justin Schultz and Jared Spurgeon, two really reliable defensemen. Erik Haula is an interesting one, was injured a little bit last season, but if he can get back to like the 50-point Erik Haula like he was with Vegas in their inaugural season, then he's going to be a guy who's definitely going to catch a lot of eyes on the open market. Same goes for Cody Eakin. He just had a fantastic year with Vegas, can be a very solid third line center for a lot of contending teams. And then Connor Sherry, who's still relatively young and has some offensive upside, hasn't been too great in Buffalo, but definitely there will be some teams out on the open market willing to give him an opportunity in my opinion. But now that we're done the honorable mentions, let's jump right into the 10 best players who will be unrestricted free agents next summer if they go unsigned this season. Starting off the video with newly crowned Stanley Cup champion Alex Pietrangelo, and before I get into it, I will say this is in no particular order. I'm not ranking these players on how good they are. It's just a compilation of the 10 best players who will be unrestricted free agents. So keep that in mind. I'm not ranking them on how good they are or whatever, so it doesn't really matter who's ahead of who. But starting off with Pietrangelo, like I said, he just captained the St. Louis Blues to a Stanley Cup. A 29-year-old defenseman has a current cap hit of $6.5 million. Probably going to get a slight raise from that wherever he does sign his new contract, whether it's with the Blues or whether it's with another team. Definitely probably will be up there around 7.5 to 8 mil in my opinion. 688 games played for him in his career, almost 400 points, currently sitting at 398. And this past season, 71 games played and 41 total points. But if I had to guess, I don't think he's going to hit the open market. I think there will be a contract extension agreed upon between Pietrangelo and the St. Louis Blues, either before next season or during the season, because he is the captain. He's been there his whole career, and I just can't really see him wanting to go anywhere else, especially after them winning a Stanley Cup. So I think if he does hit the open market, he's definitely going to be someone a lot of teams go after. But like I said, if I had to guess right now, I think there probably will be a new contract for Alex Pietrangelo with the St. Louis Blues before next summer. Next up, we have another member of the St. Louis Blues, and that is Brayden Schenn. Obviously had a little bit of a down year compared to his 2017-18 season where he had a career high 70 points, but he was still very solid this past season with 54 points in 72 games, and I'm pretty sure Brayden Schenn doesn't care about his regular season point totals because he is now a Stanley Cup champion. He's a 27-year-old centerman, has a current cap hit of $5.125 million, 587 career games for Schenn, 372 total points. And this is another guy, I feel like he's just going to stay a member of the St. Louis Blues. I feel like he's not going to make it to unrestricted free agency, but then again, I wouldn't be surprised if he does. I think out of the two, Alex Pietrangelo is definitely more likely to get a contract before next summer than Brayden Schenn, but it's not like St. Louis is in a cap situation. Yes, they do have to sign restricted free agent Jordan Binnington, but I do think they're going to really focus on bringing this core back and trying to run it back for the next couple of years because they don't really have any very old players that are a member of their main core. So I think Brayden Schenn will probably get a contract extension with the Blues before next summer. He's a very consistent guy and played a pretty big part in their Stanley Cup championship run, so I definitely think they're going to want to bring him back, but then again, I wouldn't be surprised if he does hit unrestricted free agency next summer. Next up, we have Erik Gustafsson, and this is a really interesting one because obviously he broke out this season in a huge way. 60 points in 79 games for the 27-year-old defenseman, current cap hit of $1.2 million, and if he can even somewhat replicate the season that he just had next year, he's going to be in for a very significant raise, and honestly, that might be a raise that Chicago is not willing to give to him. Obviously, they do have a lot of money tied up between Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane and Duncan Keith and guys like that, so they don't really have too much money to throw around, and they're going to have to sign restricted free agent Alex DeBrincat next year as well. So I honestly think Erik Gustafsson, there is a very strong chance that he does hit the open market, and for a guy who's only 27, will be 28 next summer, and if he has around 45, even 50 points, or somewhat replicates his 60-point season, there's going to be a lot of teams lining up for his services, and a lot of teams willing to throw a lot of money at him, especially considering how much money players are getting in unrestricted free agency over the past couple of years. So don't be surprised if next summer Erik Gustafsson is one of the more coveted free agents and definitely gets a very hefty rookie contract. Next up, from the Nashville Predators, we have Mikael Granlund, and this is another player who I would not be surprised if he does hit unrestricted free agency next summer and there isn't a contract agreed upon between him and the Predators. And I think mainly because there is another guy who's an unrestricted free agent on Nashville that we're going to touch on a little later in the video that is definitely going to be a main priority to bring back over Mikael Granlund. And obviously they just signed Matt Duchene to that lucrative contract, and there isn't going to be too much money to give around. And if Mikael Granlund can, put up like a 65-point season in his contract year next season, then Nashville is probably not going to be able to bring him back or really compete with offers that he could get from other teams on the open market, especially just considering how much players are getting down in free agency, which is pretty crazy. And I honestly just don't really like the fit of Granlund in Nashville. He's a natural center, but they already have Johansson and Duchene, who are going to be their 1 and 2 guys, and Granlund I think is too good to be a third line center, so they're probably going to play him on the wing next season. So I just think Mikael Granlund is probably going to test free agency next summer and definitely going to get some lucrative offers from some teams that are probably going to be able to play him in a more prominent role than Nashville can. Next up, we have the other Nashville unrestricted free agent that, like I said earlier, is going to be probably a main priority over Mikael Granlund, and that is Roman Josi, and he's going to be in for a huge raise. His current cap hit, $4 million. In my opinion, that is one of the more team-friendly deals in the entire NHL when you consider that he is the captain of that team and what he can bring, in terms of a defensive and being an offensive defenseman. He's just a really good all-around defenseman, and I honestly think there is going to be an extension agreed upon between Josi and Nashville. I can't really see him hitting the open market. He seems like a guy who really wants to stay there in Nashville, and I definitely think Nashville is going to do all they can to bring him back and not want to lose him. He has 348 points in 563 career games, 82 games played this past season, 15 goals, and 41 assists for 56 points. He's only 29 years old, probably going to get a pretty hefty extension from Nashville, and I definitely think it is well deserved considering he has only made about $4 million over the previous couple of seasons. But if he does hit that open free agent market, there is going to be a lot of teams throwing a lot of money at a guy like Roman Josi, but like I said, if I had to bet on it, I think there will be an extension between Josi and Nashville before next summer. Next up, we have Mike Hoffman from the Florida Panthers, and this is a guy who I honestly think probably will hit unrestricted free agency. Obviously, Florida would like to bring him back because he was pretty fantastic for them last season. 70 points in 82 games, 36 goals for him, 300 points in 424 career games, but he's probably gonna, warrant around 7.5 to 8 mil, just basing it off of what other guys of his caliber have made in unrestricted free agency over the past couple of years, and I don't know if Florida would really want to give that out to a guy like Mike Hoffman, who's already 29 years old, and Florida does have a couple of young guys like Borgstrom and a guy like Owen Tippett who could come into that top 6 and maybe fill a role that Mike Hoffman leaves voided if he does sign somewhere else. And obviously they just gave out that huge contract to Sergei Bobrovsky, and I'm sure they don't want to tie too much money up in guys like Hoffman and Bobrovsky, and they want to leave some flexibility there. So I think Mike Hoffman will be an unrestricted free agent next summer, and he is definitely a guy that a lot of teams could use, a scoring winger. I'm looking at you, Ken Holland in Edmonton. Save some money and clear up some cap space to sign this guy because you need wingers to play with McDavid and Draisaitl. But that's a topic for another video. But like I said, I honestly wouldn't bet on an extension between Hoffman and Florida, and I think he will be one of the bigger name free agents next summer. Next up, we have Chris Kreider from the New York Rangers, and if I had to guess, I think he will hit free agency if he remains with the New York Rangers. But there's been a lot of rumors surrounding Kreider, and rumors talked about maybe him being traded and New York wanting to get rid of him. And I think if he is traded to another team, then he will probably get an extension with that team. But New York, now that they have obviously signed Panarin and gave him a lot of money, they're going to have to sign Jacob Trouba. There isn't going to be too much money to give around from the Rangers, and Kreider is probably going to, warrant up there around 5.5 to 6 mil if he continues to put up 50-point seasons. So, like I said, I think if he stays with the Rangers, he will be a UFA, but if he is traded somewhere else, I think there could be an extension between him and his new team, wherever that may be, before next summer. But he's a 28-year-old left winger, $4.625 million cap hit currently, 271 points in 460 career games, 52 points in 79 games this past season. Definitely a very valuable asset for a contended team in the top 6. He can bring some physicality and some scoring, to teams that need that, and I think New York, they should probably hold on to him because you have a lot of young guys there, and I think a veteran like Kreider would definitely be nice to keep around, but then you risk losing him for nothing in free agency, so it's going to be a tough decision. But whatever happens with Chris Kreider, I think whatever team he lands on after next summer is definitely going to be happy with him. Next up, we have defenseman from Boston, Torey Krug, and he's also been a guy that's kind of had his name thrown around in trade talks, but I don't really understand why. Maybe it's because Boston knows they're going to have to pay this guy a lot of money, so maybe if that reason, we could see him potentially traded throughout the season, maybe at the deadline, and I just think it's really an interesting situation because Torey Krug is a very, very good offensive defenseman, 53 points in 64 games this past season, 288 total points in 462 games. He currently makes $5.25 million, and he's probably going to be in for a big raise, probably up there making around $7.5 to $8 million, especially for a 28-year-old defenseman who can put up numbers like Torey Krug. So wherever he ends up, if he stays with Boston and they find an extension, I think they'd be very happy with that. But, they don't have the most money to throw around, and it definitely would be a tough thing. Maybe they'd have to make some moves to get more flexibility under the cap, and if he hits unrestricted free agency, he could be a guy that definitely gets paid a lot next summer. Next up, we have newly acquired from the Toronto Maple Leafs Tyson Barrie, a 27-year-old defenseman who's most likely a one-year rental for them. It's rumored that he wants about $8 million in his next contract extension, and that is just something that the Leafs can't do, especially after they do bring back Mitch Marner. Current cap hit of $5.5 million for Tyson Barrie, 307 points in 484 career games, 59 points in 78 games this past season, and when he's a free agent next summer, there's going to be teams lined up throwing a lot of money at this guy, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see, who wins that bidding war and what type of situation that Tyson Barrie wants to go to, because he is only 27 years old, so there's going to be a lot of teams willing to throw a lot of term and a lot of money at him, and I think it will be worth it though for this one-year rental for Toronto because he's going to play a huge part for them, but I'm very intrigued to see what happens with him next summer when he does become an unrestricted free agent. And now finishing off the video with the biggest name player, and that is Taylor Hall, but if I had to guess, I don't think he's going to be an unrestricted free agent next summer. I think there probably will be a contract extension agreed upon between the Devils and Hall. He's a 27-year-old left winger, a current cap hit of $6 million, but what I will say is Taylor Hall might see guys like, John Tavares and Artemi Panarin getting those massive deals as unrestricted free agents, and maybe that's something that he wants to do himself. Maybe he wants to go see his options, but I think New Jersey will be, willing to give him what he wants, and obviously I think it's a pretty solid situation. You just picked up PK Subban, you got Jack Hughes, you signed Wayne Simmons, you still have young guys like Jesper Bratt and Nico Hischier, so I think it is a situation that Taylor Hall probably wants to stay in. He already won an MVP there, a Hart Trophy, and I think they will be in contention for the playoffs next season. 511 points in 562 games for Hall, 37 points in 33 games this past season. Was injured a little bit, but definitely should be back healthy and ready to go, and back to being up there around a point per game and an MVP caliber player. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out with Taylor Hall, but I wouldn't put my money on him being a free agent next year. So that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Make sure to leave all your predictions for this free agency class down in the comment section below. How many of these guys do you think are actually going to make it to next summer without a new contract? And if they do, how much do you think they're going to make, and what teams do you think could be in contention for some of these players? And with that being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content, and I will see you guys all in the next video.